A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors. Many people's choice for second or even first best movie in the franchise. It's hard for me to say whether or not I've actually seen this movie before or not. As I've mentioned before, I never had a real strong relationship with the Nightmare franchise growing up. I've seen parts of a lot of them, but they all just kind of blend together in my memories. Except for the first, of course, which is very distinctive to me. And upon watching the second recently, I realized I do have vivid memories of seeing that when I was younger, most notably the opening sequence with the school bus. I thought the remake for A Nightmare on Elm Street sucked, and you're talking to a guy who's an advocate for a lot of horror remakes, as you can see if you watch my top 31 favorite horror movies list. But outside of all that, the Nightmare franchise is just kind of a blur to me, but now I'm doing my best to rectify that. So when I finally reached Dream Warriors, I was curious to see whether something in this movie caused some kind of nostalgic reaction in my brain. I was further excited because, as I mentioned already, it's kind of highly regarded by Nightmare fans. So here's my review, and this is full spoilers, of course, so if you haven't seen it, you probably shouldn't watch this. I have to be honest, I had mixed feelings about this movie. I'll start with the positives. I appreciated the attempt by the filmmakers to take this idea to the next level, basically to prevent it from getting stale. To me, it's a logical progression to have the Nightmare kids find a way to fight back against Freddy in the dream world, a place where most times his victims are pretty helpless. I like the attempt to give more information about Freddy's backstory. It really offers some interesting and disturbing ideas, such as Freddy's mother being raped by hundreds of mental patients, and him basically being the product of that. I thought his ghost mother informing the lead doctor of that was a little bit strange. There just might have been a better way to relay that information from a storytelling perspective. I also really dug the idea that Freddy is absorbing the souls of the kids that he kills, and that's what makes him stronger. It kind of gives him more of a purpose outside of just revenge. I thought all the kills in this were pretty memorable, and honestly the kills are the highlight of this franchise, simply because there's just endless opportunities when you're having murders inside of a dream world. You can kind of bend the rules and think outside the box, and I think the filmmakers in general do that. Even if it is a little bit hard to believe that the people at the hospital see a girl hanging out of a television and somehow think that's suicide. But more on that in a minute. I would say maybe there's not enough kill sequences in this movie, but the ones we do get are pretty memorable. I particularly like the Puppet Master Freddy being the explanation for the sleepwalking kid. That's just really creative to me. And even though I'm not the biggest Nancy fan, and I've said that before, as a final girl, it's kind of nice to see her back in a mentor role. If for nothing else, just to bring things full circle. To me, it's always helpful to have one central character outside of the killers that the audience recognizes and can get invested in. Also, you can still see Wes Craven's influence with the dark comedy aspect of this movie. I know at some point during the franchise, they go a little bit too far with the comedy in Freddy, but to me in this movie, the horror and comedy aspects of Freddy still feel pretty balanced. You still have to fear him as a character, and I think this movie handles that pretty well. So now on to my negatives, and this might get me a little flack, but I just have to be honest. While I like the idea of the dream powers for each kid, I didn't necessarily care for the execution of them. I don't know, some of them just felt a little bit hokey to me. I think they could have scaled back on them just a little bit to kind of avoid this. I don't know, seeing Kristen flip around like a gymnast and drop kicking Freddy just came off a little bit silly at times. As did the kid transforming into his wizard costume and battling Freddy in the hallway. It didn't feel like a horror movie in that moment. I understand it's about imagination to an extent, but the way it was handled just kind of took me out of the movie. And I think that's this movie's biggest problem, is it just has tone issues. I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be taking seriously and what I'm not. Acting is never top-notch in 80s slasher movies, and I don't expect it to be. But I do expect it to be somewhat decent. And outside of the very small role by Lawrence Fishburne, who was a pleasant surprise by the way, a lot of these actors are just really hamming it up. The actress who played Tamarin, to be more specific. Her line delivery was just incredibly cheesy to me. I've expressed my issues with Nancy in the first movie for the same exact reason, but in this movie, Nancy is much tamer. But I felt like everyone around her just dialed it up way too much. I don't know if it was the writing or the delivery, but it was just kind of laughable at times. As was the, in general, dense nature of these supposedly brilliant doctors who are taking care of these kids. I understand these are outrageous circumstances with a guy killing people in their dreams, but at some point you have to start to believe that something weird is going on. As I said, especially when you find a girl hanging out of a TV and you try to say it's suicide. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There's just these moments throughout this movie of unintentional humor. At least I think it was unintentional. I guess that's kind of the problem, I just didn't really know how to take it sometimes. I think the biggest problem is I just had no connection with any of these characters. And that makes it very difficult for me to invest in any movie. That being said, I understand this is mostly meant to just be a good time, kind of check your brain at the door type situation, which I understand with a movie like this, and I agree with. And I did have a good time with it for the most part. There's just certain things that are hard to overlook when you're trying to review a movie. I guess I was just expecting a little bit more with the amount of praise that it gets. Also, one final positive, because I didn't mention this when I was talking about it earlier, but the stop motion effects are always welcome to me. I'll take them over CGI any day of the week. So overall, I thought Dream Warriors was fun, but I'm definitely not in the camp that thinks it's better than the original. I felt like the original was much more subtle, and it handled the more fantastical elements of the world much more gracefully. And I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that has a lot to do with the direction of Wes Craven, which of course he wasn't a director for this particular entry. I'm actually not even sure I would rank this over the second movie. I think Dream Warriors might feel a little bit more alive visually, and that's why people like it. But in my opinion, it's lacking in every other department. So let me know what you think about Dream Warriors. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Where do you put it in your Nightmare on Elm Street rankings? As always, please like, comment, share, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, and I'll see you next time right here on Real Shift. Thanks for watching. Peace out.